Today, Poland, Germany, and Europe find themselves at a unique point in history. Unfortunately, 30 years of liberal peace have turned out to be 3 decades of at least partially illusion. Western Europe too easily believed that Russian bear could be tamed. Poland has lived for centuries in Russia's shadow, and we see clearly that imperialism lies at the core of the Kremlin policy and Kremlin politics. Putin received a generous offer from the West just before the war: supply us with raw materials and take the right side of a possible dispute with China, and we will turn a blind eye to Russia's internal affairs and also what you're doing in your direct neighborhood. The problem is that dealing with Russia is like making a pact with the devil. Gas projects and Wandel durch Handel policy were those projects which were to tie Russia with the West. Ultimately, it became a noose around the neck of countries dependent on Russia's gas. This is very clearly visible today during the crisis, during this war. What for the West was just a matter of failed business interest has become a matter of life and death for countries like Ukraine and Poland and all the others which are located between Germany and Russia. In Russian political thinking, it is clear that the existence of an independent Ukraine, as well as independent Baltic states and independent Poland, are incompatible with the existence of the Russian Empire. Tackling Russian imperialism is in fact a matter of Europe's survival and longer-term future. Now let me focus on Europe and Poland and Germany and how I view the current situation in the context of the past. When Wolfgang Schäuble won his first election 50 years ago, Europe was divided by the Iron Curtain. And it would still be so were it not for solidarity movement and strong US transatlantic stance. Without Polish Solidarność, the fall of the Berlin Wall would not have been possible. The Kissingers of the world did not believe that the Soviet juggernaut could fall. But fortunately, millions of ordinary Poles did. It was they who brought about the wall's decline before it actually fall. The Polish-German border treaty, the unification of Germany, and the departure of the Red Army from the Elbe and Vistula were a real new beginning in the history of Europe. It was then that the political 21st century began on the old continent. We were younger then and more hopeful. And today, it is worth recalling the bitter words of Jürgen Habermas 10 years ago in the walls of the oldest university in Belgium. In the European Union, solidarity and democracy have become scarce commodities. In the European Union, we need solidarity. This is an effort to work together for a common political perspective. Ukrainians today are fighting not only for their freedom, they are fighting to defend Europe. We loudly demanded the presence of the Patriot missile launchers in Ukraine, and our voice was heard. Thank you for this. Ukraine's defeat may become a prelude to World War III. Therefore, today, there is no reason to block support for Kiev, to procrastinate. Thus, I call for decisive actions by German government on all sorts of weapons to be delivered to Ukraine. The battle for our freedom, our future, is raging as we speak. And if we have been investing for years in heavy war equipment, in tanks, they must not be left to rust in storehouses, but be placed in the hands of Europe's defenders. Now, what kind of Europe does Ukraine defend? What is Europe? Let's come back to those questions. Europe is nothing other than the nations which form it. There is no Europe above and beyond its nations. Unity should not be confused with uniformity. Europe is a multiplicity of languages and cultures, and this diversity is a heritage for which we have a common responsibility. Making that common responsibility means more Europe or means more moral hazard. I think we should think twice before we make that a joint responsibility. I know it's one of topics of German debate and a debate in Europe. A Europe governed from only 2 or 3 capitals will move towards an oligarchy of states. This does not bode well for the future of the Union. This goes against not only the basic principles of democracy, it is contrary to European interests. In his Ratisbon lecture, Pope Benedict XVI pointed out that Europe rests on 2 foundations, faith and reason, the cathedral and the university. What connects them both is rationality. This unique synthesis gave birth to democracy. In the hands of modern man, utopia has become a promissory note to be paid in the future. These are the words of Reinhard Koselleck, one of the most important German thinkers of the 20th century. The utopia of the United States of Europe is a blank promissory note. By taking the side of democracy, we are against the utopia of a brave new world. We cannot think about relations between Germany and Poland in terms of a center and periphery. Peripheries that work for the prosperity of the center. Growing volumes of trade are a good sign of advantages for both sides. I'm not sure if all of you are familiar with the volume of trade between Germany and Poland, Germany and the Visegrad Group. Germany and Visegrad Group trade, export-import, is a bigger volume by far, mit Abstand, than between Germany and China, for instance, or Germany and France, or Germany and United States. It's much bigger, Germany, Poland, Czech Republic, than Germany and the United States or China. This is, I think, quite awakening. This is even more the case since the war in Ukraine has proven where Europe reaches. It has shifted the European center of gravity around which the affairs of the continent orbit. We have been in Europe for 1,000 years, and our identity is part of European identity. Poland is not the younger sister of the old Europe countries. Polishness is one of the many faces of Europeanness. We do not need to catch up with Europe because we have been a part of it for 1,000 years. We have one of the oldest traditions of statehood in Europe. The Polish constitution was the first in Europe. Poland stood up for Europe against barbarism at least 3 times in the 20th century. In 1920, when we won against Soviet Russia, in 1939, when we went to an unequal battle with Nazi Germany, and in 1980, when Solidarity challenged Moscow. The history of Poland is a history of freedom. Poland is by no means a young democracy. The history of democracy in Poland dates back to the 15th century. Poles do not need to be schooled in democracy or the rule of law. The only thing which we should learn together is an appropriate level of cooperation for the future of Europe. Now, a couple of sentences on Polish-German relations. I will start this part with a couple of sentences also on our friend Wolfgang Schäuble. The Polish word honesty does not fully reflect what it contains in the English integrity or the German Integrität, which means living in accordance with the values one professes. If I had to describe Wolfgang Schäuble as briefly as possible, I would say that he's a fully integrated man, uncompromising in matters that are not up for negotiation, combined with the ability to cooperate for the greater good. Were there more people like Wolfgang Schäuble in German politics, in European politics, I'm sure our future would be brighter. Thank you for your time. And at this juncture, I'm going to thank also all other friends who cooperate closely with Poland, in particular in this very critical matter of the war in Ukraine, like Paul Zimniak or Friedrich Merz. Thank you very much for your cooperation on all the critical matters. Polish-German relations are a litmus test of Europe's stability. When Poland and Germany have good neighborly relations, the entire continent enjoys peace and prosperity. When we are in conflict, it means a dark time for the rest of Europe as well. Some say that Poland is a buffer zone between East and West. There is a pessimistic view in Polish historiography that our geopolitical location is our curse. Even a cursory glance to the past painfully confirms this conviction. This is corroborated by the words of the head of the German General Staff, Hans von Seeckt. He wrote in 1922 that the existence of Poland is unbearable, incompatible with the living conditions of Germany. It must and will disappear through its own weakness and through Russia with German help. The end of quote. And yet, despite this historical baggage, we can look to a future of Europe together. More than 100 years ago, just after Poland regained its independence, Helmut von Gerlach, during a heated conflict regarding the establishment of the Polish-German border, empathetically introduced the Polish point of view to his compatriots. In his political pamphlet entitled "The Failure of German Policy Towards Poland," this one of the fathers of Polish-German reconciliation wrote, and I quote, "Then agreement. Otherwise, there will never be an end to the strife between these nations. For me, in relations with Poland, it means the same as in all political activities. No more politics of violence. We will have to establish relations with Poland, our neighbor, for decades and centuries. We are stuck with each other. Trade exchange must be nurtured and developed with all our might. Peaceful coexistence must be possible. So if you can't approach this matter thinking at the next opportunity, we will take revenge, we will strike back, we will see who will be stronger. No, only by agreement." The end of quote. The crisis of our time. Now a couple of words of the nowadays. How does all this carry over into the lives and feelings of ordinary Poles and ordinary Germans and ordinary Europeans? We are facing the most serious crisis in decades, which raises the legitimate concerns, enters our homes, makes our citizens and our countries feel insecure. The word crisis has become so burdensome, we need to put something on the other scale in order to counterbalance it. When the weight of everyday life becomes so great, people can turn their backs on each other, but it also happens that it can inspire them to reach out a helping hand. Almost 80 years ago, Europe was not only in crisis, it was in material and moral ruin. As we left this valley of despair, our countries had to follow different paths. Poland was deprived of the opportunities that many other countries had at their disposal, and yet we have come to a common juncture. Almost 80 years ago, European societies were threatened with social enemy. Today, we are in an incomparably better situation. But we must remember that any economic crisis and geopolitical crisis is also a threat to social cohesion. Therefore, there are two possibilities before us. One is to loosen social ties even further. The other is to build solidarity. Either we will be self-centered or we will be able to see the needs of the others. Today, we have to see the needs of Ukraine. If we succumb to selfishness, it will be a great victory for enemies of freedom. And this victory will lead to another. In the face of war, it is worth remembering the old rule that you do not leave the wounded on the battlefield. This is not just a rhetorical phrase because Europe is at war. The blood of Ukrainian soldiers, the blood of the Ukrainian nation will burden our conscience if we remain indifferent. If we ignore Russia's barbarity in Ukraine, tomorrow the same barbarians will invade our cities. Russia is doing what it is because it has perceived itself to have tacit consent for such behavior. Over the years, she has seen that the history of Europe is based on falsehood, that they are not to blame, that the wrongs are not compensated, that Russia is not going to be held responsible for their war crimes. Unfortunately, also in Poland, we have the feeling that to this day, not all in Germany feel this and really understand how great a sacrifice we made during World War II. We need a politics that operates at a higher pitch, one that helps citizens listen to the needs of others and notice the smallest manifestations of human suffering. Some people say that German society is aging and it is therefore afraid of anything that might undermine its well-being. People like us, who have themselves been battle-scarred, know perfectly how much unification cost Germany. The underground organization that my father created, so-called Fighting Solidarity, was strongly working towards achieving the fall of communism and regaining Polish independence. And it was one of the first to speak openly about German reunification in the 80s, during the 80s, despite the fears that many Poles had after the experiences of World War II. We believed in the 80s that a strong Germany need not be hostile to Poland. We believed that a strong Poland and strong Germany, united by cooperation, are the guarantors of peace and solidarity throughout Europe. In the context of the new economic challenges and in the face of the war in Ukraine, we need a paradigm based on what Benedict XVI called the logic of the gift. Today, one of the first sentences of the encyclical Caritas in Veritate resonates more strongly than ever. Caritas is the extraordinary force that leads people to commit themselves courageously and generously to the cause of justice and peace." The end of quote. It may sound like a paradox, but in the face of war and crisis, focusing on economics and development is not enough. We need a politics of freedom and solidarity. And its source can and should be the strengthening of Polish-German relations. A strengthening that will be good for us and good for Europe. A strengthening based on equal partnership. A strengthening based on a singular vision of the future, that of free and democratic nations which seek to build a strong and united Europe. Thank you very much.